Hi, my name's John Byler, and I've been working on a book called You Look Great, Coming Home with Mild Traumatic Brain Injury, which is sort of my dispatches from inside the injury. This video is most of a presentation that I've given to medical groups and case workers and graduate students, and I hope it'll be helpful to those of you who either have the injury or maybe you're a caregiver and you want to understand the injury better. I'm throwing open a window into the not well understood world of neurotrauma rehabilitation. I don't have any book learning in medicine or neuroscience, but the past 2.5 years I've gained an excruciating amount of field experience. The presentation's in 3 parts. The first part is about the accident, what happened, and also about traumatic brain injury. The second part is the first month and also highlights and lowlights of the recovery process. And then the third part is the prognosis for the future and then a big finish at the end. So I'll start off with the accident. If you'd been driving along the highway that night, you'd have thought they were shooting a movie. Southbound traffic suddenly crawled, and on the grassy median inside a barricade of 3 sets of flashing lights, fire truck, ambulance, and Massachusetts state trooper, there was a blue 1993 Volvo. It sat crooked, its trunk crushed into the back seat. Not far from the crumpled Volvo stood a tall teenage boy playing the bagpipes. Let's call him Andrew, because that was his name. 3 firemen surrounded him, grinning as they trained their walkie-talkies on him and his blaring drones and the even louder, melancholy wail of the pipes. The kid stood there as casually and as coolly as if he were playing for dollar bills in Harvard Square, which he often did when he needed the money. The man standing off to the side watching all of this, forehead in hand, holding back sobs, trying to take it all in, was me, his dad. I didn't know it yet, but I'd suffered a traumatic brain injury. And Andrew didn't know it yet, but he'd fractured his back. Driving by us that night, you'd probably have thought, that's got to have one hell of a backstory. Well, this is the backstory of that night, but mostly it's the story of what it's like to sustain and try to recover from a traumatic brain injury. That night was 2.5 years ago, and I can tell you that even neurologists who've been at it for years want to know this story.
Would you like to get inside my brain?
Not because it's my story, but because the human brain is so complex, newsflash, I know, that its injuries can be as intricate as a fingerprint and as personal. Traumatic brain injuries can also be quite ironically debilitating if you want to see them that way. My new friend Greg, the firefighter, the other half of our 2-man support group, had the metal handle of a fire hose fall on top of his head. I call him the man who mistook a fire hose for his hat. Greg's internal gyroscope is so messed up that he can't step onto a ladder without the floor coming up to meet him. Although some of our symptoms overlap, our injuries are significantly different. For example, mine prevents me from organizing and sorting not only physical things but also ideas and information, which was a big part of what I did for a living for 25 years. If I don't have a script, I easily get bogged down with word sorting and I start stammering. It's healthier, easier, I guess, to say that the injury can be ironic than it is to say that it's cruel. Neurologists, young and old, summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School, or just plain old cum laude, don't know 80% of what I'm going to tell you. My injury is my fingerprint, and only I can tell you about every line and crack and whorl. If the process of neurotrauma rehabilitation were common knowledge among them, if it were at all predictable the way, say, recovering from knee surgery is predictable, my treatment and Greg's early on would have been different, and our recovery might have been faster and more complete. So I don't get nervous when I speak with my prepared remarks in front of doctors, caseworkers, or graduate students in training, or the world at large on this video. I know something they don't. Okay, back to that night. My life as I knew it and loved it changed on September 21st, 2005, when my then 16-year-old son Andrew and I walked away from a horrific car accident. Here's what happened. I was driving Andrew home from bagpipe practice on 495 South at 9:45 p.m. in our 1988 Volvo 240, a model I am now intensely loyal to. We were going about 65 in the middle lane, and out of nowhere a Mercedes, going over 100, slammed into us from behind so hard we careened all over the road, easily the most terrifying moment of our lives. After what seemed like an eternity of trying to get control of the car and me shouting, "Oh my God, oh my God," we ended up in the grassy meridian on the left. The trunk flattened, but we were safe. Or at least I thought we were safe.
Expert drivers tell us we must give ourselves a margin of safety, a reserved space between our car and the one ahead.
Andrew was the calm, collected one. He should be an astronaut. He kept asking me if I was okay because of the yelling. We got out of the car and I called 911 and my wife, Lynn. I remember my head hurt, but I was unmarked and I hadn't banged my head on anything. Andrew had a gash on his knee from the dashboard, but aside from some aches and pains, we seemed to be okay. I shudder to think about all those trucks roaring by on 495. When we sing about grace in church, I think about us in the car, safely delivered to the side of the highway. And I'm grateful to the Lord, and to Swedish engineering. Well, pretty quickly there was a lot of milling around the side of the highway. The troopers filling out their reports, bright colored lights flashing, ambulance, state police, fire truck. The Chelmsford Fire Department asked if we wanted to get anything out of what was left of the car. We had a full tank of gas, so they wanted to walk us over with a fire extinguisher. I said, yeah, Lynn's birthday present and Andrew's bagpipes. Turns out one of the firemen was a huge fan of bagpipes. He'd just been listening to bagpipes in his car and started asking Andrew questions about his piping band and so on, and the competition coming up that Saturday at the Highland Games. Andrew, in the middle of all that chaos, said, "I'll play something for you." He opened up his case and played a gorgeous, dramatic medley, and the grinning, benevolent firemen had their walkie-talkies trained on him so the guys back at the firehouse could hear him too. We went from one indelible moment to another, and that cinematic scene became Andrew's quite moving college application essay, so you see some good has come of it already. Before I move on to traumatic brain injury, let me just tell you about Andrew. He fractured his back in 3 places. One fracture is healed, and he lives now with constant pain. He'd also had a concussion and some lingering post-concussive symptoms, and Andrew's pediatrician put it this way: the reason you and your dad are recuperating at a different pace is because your brain is veal and his is mutton. Andrew is a cheerful, spirited person and is handling his adversity with patience and dignity. But as Bart Simpson asked, why would God punish a kid? I mean, an American kid. We'll get into that a little later. Next, I'd like to talk to you about traumatic brain injury. Here's some quick statistics on it. 5.3 million Americans are currently disabled by traumatic brain injury. 1.5 million Americans suffer a traumatic brain injury each year. 80,000 Americans sustain long-term disability from TBI each year. Every 21 seconds, someone in the U.S. suffers TBI. So as you can see, this injury is huge in this country. I'd like to emphasize that it is also chronically misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed. I read about a woman in her car hit at a stop sign by a car going only 15 miles an hour. She seemed fine, but over the next week, her body and her brain gradually absorbed the shock, and she suffered a traumatic brain injury. I later asked my caseworker whether I shouldn't have waved off the ambulance that night and gone to the hospital given what's happened to me. She said because I wasn't bleeding, they probably would have just given me 2 aspirin and told me to go home. But what is traumatic brain injury? The brain has the consistency of silly putty, and the inside of the skull that houses it is not lined with padding.
Hi, I'm Sue Pearson, brain injury consultant for the Iowa Department of Education. Some damage to the brain occurs directly through the impact of the blow or crash. The back of the skull is smooth, but in front, up near your eyes and sinuses, bony projections on the inside of the skull can also cause damage. So in an injury where acceleration or deceleration is involved, whiplash for example, your head is thrown forward. Your brain is going to hit the front of your skull, and then it's going to bounce back and hit the back part of your skull. This is called coup and contre coup. When the brain slams up against the inside of the skull in the front, it can catch and tear on the bony prominences. So the way your skull is built can actually cause problems in a traumatic injury.